Hi.
So again, the Venice Project Center was founded in 1988. The purpose was to leave Venice better than we found it. Again, it is one of over 50 Worcester Polytechnic Institute project centers around the world. First, we just want to give some of the great accomplishments that the VPC has achieved in the past 35 years. We have done over 236 projects, which has created over 1 million data points. Over 800 students have worked on these projects in teams of 3 to 4 students. Each team works about 2,000 hours per project. And if we calculate that by the 236 projects we have done, we have worked over 450,000 hours of work. Next, we just want to kind of give an overview of how much the VPC has done with cutting-edge technology, since we know it's changed over the past 35 years. So in 1986, the first GIS was developed by MapInfo. This was before the VPC was founded, but as soon as the VPC was founded in 1988, they started using GIS with DOS. And then in 1991, the web started to appear globally. And then in 1996, the first web GIS was released. As soon as that happened, the next year, the VPC immediately started to use the first web GIS and developed it themselves. And then in 2007, first iPhone, huge deal. And again, the VPC used and created the first mobile app in 2007. And then in 2012, Firebase, which is a cloud database, was released. And then next year, they created Venepedia, which is this great information website that we will talk about later in the presentation. They also created an interactive real-time dashboard website. And then all of this effort that teams have put into projects can be shown because the VPC has won 8 Best Project of the Year awards. And these projects have ranged from lagoon archaeology in 1990 to feasibility of vacuum sewers in 97, all the way to preserving traditional boats in Venice in 2005. But now we want to kind of talk about what we did as our group, the 35th anniversary team. First, we took all of the information that the VPC has gathered in the past 35 years, and we organized it to make it more accessible and easier to understand. What we did is, again, we all know that the VPC has a great 3.0 website, which hosts a lot of the publications, the data, the reports, and projects that they have. But what we wanted to do as a group is we want to take all of the information that's around other websites in Google Drive as well and put it into just one central hub that's easy to access. So we created a repository. Now, with this repository, we took all of the 236 projects and made categories and subcategories to make it easier to access and find a specific project, report, or data that you want. Also on this repository, we looked at a master spreadsheet. This has all of the 236 projects, all of their reports, along with authors and sponsors and other data that is there. Now we're going to talk about separating these projects.
So today we're going to try to give you a little taste of all the different topics that the Venice Project Center has covered over the last 35 years. I'm going to start to go into some of them, and Matt's going to kind of finish for me. So we separated the projects that have been covered here into 6 main categories. We're going to go through each one of them, give you some examples of really good projects that have been done here, and go into a little bit of detail of why that matters. So first of all, we're going to start with science and technology. There have been 80 projects at the Venice Project Center in science and technology. It really is at the root of almost everything we've done here. As Liz kind of talked to us about, every single project that is done here uses cutting-edge technology. We are a Polytechnic Institute, of course, so every single student here is an engineer and is really trying to do their best to keep on the edge. So, as Liz already mentioned, we have gone from using MS-DOS to Windows to now the Windows 11. As our team has gone through the archives the last 35 years, we found many, many files using like Word 97 and very, very ancient applications that don't even run anymore. There have been so many different evolutions that this project center has made, and we just keep coming up with more and more innovative ways to collect data for Venice and try to kind of help that out. So let's talk about some of these projects. So there's 4 main categories we kind of broke down to talk about with science and technology. That's education, applications, instruments, and startups. Those are how many projects were done in each of these categories. And this is our great STEM team who we're going to hear from tomorrow. So first of all, education. This is a really good example, just to start, a interactive Venice. Now this was an application made primarily to try to get young people involved in a lot of the different topics the VPC is covering. So not only did they create online video games for younger children to try to get involved and cover some of the topics with Venice, but also they made public art installations and many other different things to try to bring awareness to a lot of the different issues that Venice is facing. Next, with applications, there's a project that kind of worked with Citizen Science, which is an international organization that tries to create projects to fight things like environmental disasters, try to help with socioeconomic distress in different cities around the world. This was an application designed to try to help other projects around the world with other students through citizen science and working with this organization to try to help, as you can see on here, the research quality and quantity that they're able to do, the literacy of the citizen scientific, and also kind of grow the community even further. The VPC is also renowned because it is actually developed quite a few instruments of its own, innovating different ways to collect data. So this is a picture we can see that, as you can tell, Fabio here is from quite a few years ago. This was a very interesting project on acid fog. They actually developed their own fog catcher in the city of Venice to try to collect atmospheric samples and test how fog actually erodes the different environments around the city. And this is the device that they created to actually do that. Finally, as Fabio kind of mentioned, this is a hub of startups. The VPC has been connected with many startups over the years, and just a couple years ago, we had a team that their primary goal was to try to help the startup process. They kind of built it down into these 4 categories: design thinking, lean user experience, agile development, and growth hacking. All of these things are trying to help benefit Venice as a whole and get even more of these different startups working, because the VPC is an organization of its own, but it has helped so many others start to help even more. Next, I'm going to talk about art and architecture real quick, which is, of course, such an important thing in the historic city of Venice. So first of all, let's talk about art itself. Very interesting project at the VPC was called Missing Venice. Now, this was a project that focused primarily on artwork that we don't have data on in Venice. There's so much artwork all around the city that is either not cataloged, or if it is, we don't really know much about it. So there's a team that specifically created an application to try to track where different pieces of artwork were across the city over time, as well as to find more information on it. A lot of this information that they found, no other organization had before on this artwork in Venice. So this is really important stuff that this team was able to find that really hadn't beforehand. Next, architecture. There's a team just a couple years ago, recently, that worked on specifically these very historic archways that you will find all throughout Venice. These are called portals or portali. These are eroding throughout the city, and they're one of the pieces of public art that seems so integrated into the city that you might just walk by them, but many of them are eroding over time and need restoration. So being able to both document these as well as figure out the process to restore them is something that a lot of people have not been able to do before, and the Venice Project Center has started to really investigate. This is a good example of just a very, very tiny fraction of the public art cataloging that has been done throughout Venice from the VPC. I'm going to talk about this a little more in a second, but thousands of artifacts have been cataloged over the last 35 years from the VPC, and they've worked tirelessly not only to find what they are and where they are, but also their condition and how we might restore them for the future. I'm going to talk about that just a bit more in a minute. Bell towers. There are over 100 bell towers throughout the city of Venice, and as it is, a small fraction of those are still in use. The rest are either overlooked, they're damaged, they need to be restored. We cataloged, I believe, all 144 bells throughout the city of Venice. We can see a picture over here of us looking at one, and it is very crucial as, obviously they're very important to the history of Venice. and again, there's very little information that we have on it. On churches, there was an investigation that the VPC did into the artifacts in each church. As you can see, all of the churches in Venice were investigated, over 100 churches. I believe there's only 88 churches in Venice out of the 140 that are still in use. The rest have either been destroyed or really aren't accessible to the public anymore. There's many, many artifacts throughout these churches that really have just sat there unnoticed for such a long period of time. These are kind of some of the things that the VPC continuously tries to catalog over time. Next, museums. Of course, one of the historic places in Venice is the Doge Palace. In 1999, the VPC actually went and cataloged and made an informational system for the Doge Palace, taking pictures and cataloging all of the different artifacts within it. And if we look right here, this is actually the 1999 Windows 9X system that the VPC designed for it. The VPC has also done this for another museum in Venice. And as you can see, cutting edge stuff here from the late 90s that was kind of really integral to them being able to run as an institution. Finally, preservation. This is probably the most important part of the art and architecture that the VPC covers. As you can see, obviously there's much art in Venice that has eroded over time, and the VPC has kind of started to find different ways that we can actually get the money to fund it. So here on the bottom is a quick explanation of how the VPC has found to work with UNESCO and other committees through other countries to get the funding to both approve contractors to work on that restoration, and then as well actually been able to start that process. So a couple years ago, the VPC has worked on a program called Preserve Venice. So over the last 30 years, the VPC has cataloged over 7,000 artifacts. Just to give you the examples, there's wellheads, there's reliefs, there's coats, there's fragments, there's flagstaffs, and there's fountains. There's many, many different types of art throughout Venice, and as you can see, we have looked at not only what are they, but what are the condition of them in, and then categorized them based on which ones are worth restoring, what are the most effective ones of the highest priority. This is a really good example of a nonprofit. This is a really good example of a nonprofit that the VPC has started trying to create. This is an application mock-up that was made to show not only what are all of the different public artifacts within the city of Venice, but also how much does it cost to restore them, who is able to do that, and who is able to donate to all of these different things. So this is a really good example of a way that the VPC is presenting to actually not only find the problem, but also the solution. I'm going to go into finally energy and environment. These are all the good categories. First of all, solar power. In the early 90s, the VPC did a study looking through all the electricity usage in Venice to try to find the most efficient way to help not only the environment, but also the efficiency of the city to save money. Here we can see that there is a project on agriculture that looked at the sediment in all of the canals. This was really important to kind of help prevent all the damage, as you can kind of see a little bit at the top there, that have occurred to the canals. And this is kind of an explanation of all of the different ways that WPI has collected data to try to improve the canal systems. Next, there was a project on pollution that went through all of the different plastic pollution across Venice, finding not only where is it, but what kind of plastic is it, can it be recycled, and where do we find it the most. The VPC has also contributed to an atlas on the lagoon. Specifically, several different projects were made to try to assist in the actual city of Venice in their preservation, and has been kind of the driving factor behind a lot of the environmental policies that they've made. On sustainability, there's a program for Climathon Venice, an annual program that was really focused on trying to fight climate change, and through a lot of the different startups the VPC has worked with, fight the disastrous environmental policies that have kind of occurred in Venice. Lastly, the environment. We have our great green team who we're going to hear from tomorrow, who has done a lot of work cataloging the green areas of Cannaregio. Next, we're going to go into infrastructure and mobility. I think we're going to hear from Matt on that.
Okay, so infrastructure and mobility. This is a big category for us, 77 projects. We broke them down into 6 subcategories, the first of which is bridges. So this was a project that was looking at bridge heights. That's the top. They kind of made an interactive application for that. And then the bottom is just a map of all the bridges in Venice. Next was maintenance. This particular project is just trying to collect an updated list of canals, bridges, segments, etc., in hopes of reducing maintenance costs. Next is traffic. So this project here, we actually had teams all around Venice tracking boats by their license plates. And they were able to generate some pretty cool visuals and maps and actually give their methodology and those maps to the city. Next is transportation. So this is looking at pedestrian traffic, specifically for tourists. So we made some maps and visuals of that. Next is accessibility. So this is looking at handicap accessibility of bridges and other public buildings. And then finally, canals. Canals is our biggest subcategory in infrastructure. So this team actually went and collected data, extensive data, on the damage that was done to canal walls. And they actually developed their own new proprietary methodology to do that. So we had teams all around Venice at all hours of the day, 2 a.m. in some cases, actually getting in boats and getting down there and looking at the damage to the canal walls. And they were, so the next category we'll talk about is history and geography, 21 projects here. We split it into 4 subcategories. The first of which is archaeology. So the Archeo Club was one of kind of the first big organizations that we worked with back in the 90s. And so a project we did with them was looking at the different types of kind of outdoor art. And I know it's hard to read, it's very old. But looking at the different types per century. Next is cartography. So this particular project was looking at the evolution of Venice via the maps. So collecting old and new maps and kind of seeing how the city changed that way. Next is tradition. So in addition to looking at kind of historical artifacts, these teams were looking at specifically how they're used and kind of collecting all of that information and trying to disseminate it further to kind of preserve the traditions of Venice. And then finally, origins of DNA. We only did 2 projects in this category. But this one's really important. National Geographic actually featured this work. So the goal of this project was to track the ancestry of native Venetians over 70,000 years ago on the mainland. And so the way they did that, they first collected DNA samples, and they were actually able to use those DNA samples to track the migratory patterns. You can see on the left, those are migratory patterns through Europe, and on the right, that's based on DNA groups. So they were actually able to take those samples and match them to a particular DNA group to see how the native Venetians came here, and National Geographic, of course, featured that work. It was a huge accomplishment for us. And then finally, our last category is socioeconomics and demographics. We have 5 subcategories here. So we have actually our own housing team, who you'll hear from next. This is a graph kind of generated by them showing who owns what in Venice. Next is our own commerce team. So they're looking at a lot of the retail stores. They did a lot of work categorizing and cataloging stuff. Next is tourism. So the 2 teams I just mentioned are going to touch on kind of a lot of this in a lot of different ways. So tourism was kind of a big impact on, of course, housing and commerce, and this particular project was looking at, perhaps a positive outlook on tourism. Of course, that was before 2020. But next we have demographics. So this is looking at different groups in Venice, locals versus tourists, who's leaving, why are they leaving, and then next was urban development. So you can actually see the evolution of the city. This project was looking at starting in the 9th century and all the way up to the mid-19th century, how the city evolved, and there's different maps, and you can see the last one right there. Oh, it's gone. Okay.
It's back.
It's back. All right.
So finally, we're going to talk about what we discovered, which was the significant impacts. So first, we want to talk about student education. So as we said, there's 800 students. We won 8 awards, so we showcased the hard work there, and 500,000 hours of work. Next, we're going to talk about collaborations and partnerships. The VPC has had over 104 unique collaborators and 35 returning sponsors. These are just a few. You can see UNESCO, Serendipity, and Venice Calls is just a few of them. We also discovered impact category of media and publicity. So the VPC itself has had hundreds of media mentions and has also contributed to the creation of a book called Venice, the City of Canals. So here you can just see a few of the examples of the magazines we've been featured in. We've been featured in articles from BBC, National Geographic, and Wired. And then this is the book in Italian that the VPC helped contribute to. And then finally, scholarly research. So the VPC has had 155 citations from the staff or students and 20 non-project related reports produced. So as Matt mentioned, we've been cited in National Geographic. They used the maps that we created from one of our projects in one of their articles. So finally, we're going to talk about the plans for the future. So the first step of that plan is engaging media. So future teams will create infographics like this one created by the 2018 team. They will also create blog posts. So in 2018, a different project also did a social media campaign, VPC Impact Week. So each day they focused on a different important aspect of Venice. And then future teams will also create social media content that will go onto Vimeo, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, because we have a lot of followers across those 4 different platforms. They will also create informational videos. So here you can see some of the interview and the interview setups that we've done with Professor Carrera, but future teams will also conduct interviews with city officials and Venetian residents, and they will create impact videos and research videos on specific themes such as canals or bridges. Finally, they will plan events and exhibits. So future teams will create photo mosaics like the ones created by a 2017 team. They will also create timelines. So here you can see on the right the Pioneer team, the Lagoon Archaeology, so basically just anything really important in VPC history. And they will follow the format of the green timeline that you can see on the left. And then future teams will also plan celebrations. So on the right you can see how the bell tower was set up for the 30th anniversary exhibition, and where the future teams are going to kind of follow that floor plan along with kind of finding a new location perhaps so that the displays can stay up longer, and they will also create invitations. Finally, future teams will update the web resources. So they will bring back Venepedia. We've touched upon that briefly, but Venepedia was a great way to learn about Venice. It had pages on anything you could think of in Venice. They will also create more tools like the 25th anniversary and 30th anniversary teams did. And they will reimagine the VPC website to make user accessibility more accessible. But this is just the beginning of celebrating the VPC's 35 years of accomplishments. We are only the first team, but there will be 4 other anniversary teams to follow. And thank you. Any questions or comments?